Hello there, my name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as Ledev, and I'm here with my part 2 of the Rastakhan Rumble card expansion card review. We got some more cards reviewed thanks to the big reveal stream, and also due to the first day of kind of like the spoiler schedule, so to speak. I decided to actually now make a couple more videos rather than trying to put this all covering the week cards, because I came to one conclusion. They're going to be revealing a lot of cards this week, and it's also, in my parts of the woods, it's actually where I work, it's Thanksgiving break, so we get a week off. So I figured it was better to actually break these down into more smaller parts, reviewing cards that are revealed from the days. That way we can catch up, and hopefully these videos are in smaller chunks than, I don't know. I don't think someone wants to endure a 2-hour video covering a week full of cards. So I figured I would take it this way. But to get this quick, let's actually get started. I'll just say the scores real quick. If you don't know how the scores are specific, you can check the first video that I have. But essentially, my scores range from amazing, which just means either a card that's very powerful, that could create an archetype, or it can raise a power level of a meta deck. There's good, which I think it's a card you can test in a deck. I don't think it's going to upgrade the power level of a deck per se, but I think it's just a safe card to test. Not great, but are cards that are in general just, they have a lot more cons than are necessary for them to be played in a deck. But if you tailor your deck around it, you could actually, the card has potential, but you do have to keep in mind the weaknesses. And bad are cards that, except for some very fringe meme cases, I would not recommend playing the card. Nevertheless, let's get started with the Ironhide Direhorn, a 7 mana 7/7 with Overkill, summon a 5/5 Ironside Rut. Now, this is actually nice to have this Overkill trigger on a high attack minion, so you do have the chance to pretty much trigger the Overkill and summoning a 5/5 for, let's say, you attack into its late game, so let's say a 5 attack. So it would still have about 2 health left, so in a sense, you would be getting a, let's see, pretty much a 13/13 in stats, but minus 5 health, so it's interesting. I will say, though, the one con with cards like this is it is in the realm where it's very prone to silence, so. But on the other hand, you still get a 7/7, so you're not totally out of the picture. I do think this is a card to consider in a ramp quest druid, because the factor is if this doesn't get silenced, the Ironhide Rut does help trigger off the quest, and even getting this for free and having additional potential synergy triggers with other cards in your deck, it's something to consider. Overall, I think the card is good, but I don't think it's going to be a meta dividing card. I think it's one of those cards you can test in like a Quest Druid deck, or you can test in a Beast Druid deck, and you'll be fine. But be prepared for this to be silenced pretty quick. I'll just say that right off the bat. Next up is a really powerful legendary they provide in the neutral spot. Undasta, I think is how you pronounce that. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a 9 mana 7/7 with Rush with Overkill. Summon a beast from your hand. Yeah, this one's a pretty easy one to say. It's amazing. This is a really good card. The factor is that this has Rush and the Overkill trigger means that you can. This is a card that doesn't have to sit on the battlefield to get the Overkill trigger to happen. You can just play this, goes into the face of a random enemy minion, or hero. Well, no, not hero because Rush, but it could go into a random enemy minion, and then the Overkill trigger happens, and there are some decks that will not mind summoning a random beast from their hand. I could imagine Hunter would be very appreciative with this, especially when they get, like, Death Rattle Hunter are probably going to consider this card because of its potential synergies of bringing back cards that, like getting a King Crush out of this, or getting the Witchwood Grizzly out of this, or even other potential cards. I think it's also possible in a beast-oriented mid-range hunter will test this as well, because getting some of the mid-range creatures out, just like a Savannah Lions, is also pretty tempting. And also, I think this might just see play in Taunt Druid as a test, just so a relatively cheap, not like cheap, but a relatively cheap way to get out your Hadronauts on turn 10, and then you can just naturalize and then go through the whole combo. But on the other side of the coin, this does waste a body slot where they probably wanted for taunt, so... I mean, it's a thought. It's probably just a fun inclusion in that deck archetype. Overall, though, I think this card is amazing. This will either spawn some pretty powerful beast mid-range to even beast late-game decks, and I think there's already deck archetypes such as Death Rattle Hunter that are looking at this card and being like, yeah, I'm going to give this a shot, and it's probably going to upgrade the power level of the deck even more, which, oh boy. Nevertheless, great card. Now, one of the first bad cards, if we're not including the Savage Striker, which technically I still haven't gave a quote-unquote score yet, since I still want to see more Druid cards, but we have the first bad card, which is the Girabachi Chicken. A 1-mana 1/1 with Overkill, gain 5 attack. Okay, this is obviously the joke card of the set. This is the card that you're supposed to kind of laugh at and chuckle. But let's just explain for people who are looking at this why this card's not that great. 1. The Overkill trigger cannot work at its current stats because there's no any way you can have a 0 health enemy minion. So you have to buff this. You probably also want to buff both the attack and the health as well, and then you have to trade into a minion that is less than how you buff this minion, which is hard because it's a 1/1. So yeah, and then you get the trigger to go off, and then you have to keep it alive to do that. I mean, there is potentially silly power in the factor that if you, in some random miracle of miracles, keep this alive, it keeping upping its attack power, and then it's prone to silence. Now, there is one epic that they revealed from this set that I'm going to talk about it sooner that might make this card at least a fun deck to brew around into a meme status. Overall, though, this card's just really bad. I would not recommend playing this. This card is very detrimental to a gameplay strategy. And it's just in general, it's a 1-mana 1/1, which, I will not even test this in a Kalicip deck. I'll just say that right off the bat. Okay, next up is the 7-mana Paladin spell, A New Challenger. Discover a 6-cost minion, summon it with Taunt and Divine Shield. This one is a really interesting defensive card that Paladin's got. 6-drops, in general, are actually potentially the more powerful cards in Hearthstone. Like, the power level of a majority of 6-drops are very, very decent. And there is a lot of them. The catch, though, is some of them either already have Taunt or Divine Shield, or both for at least one 6-drop I can remember right off the bat. But still, just the fact that you can make a Taunt minion and then have Divine Shield, or just have a Divine Shield minion, then have Taunt. And then there's just some more tempting targets, like giving Karen this, that's a 6-drop, or even giving, let's see, let me remember all of them. Karen, there's also Wind Fury Harpy. There is some tempting 6-drops when you look at your Hearthstone collection for both Paladin and in the neutral slot that you don't mind spending 7 mana to at least get it with Taunt and Divine Shield. Now, is this card perfect? Not necessarily. For one, it is still high cost, and there is still variance, which is going to vary depending on meta and meta, whether the power level of this card is good. One thing I should mention is that this is a 7-mana spell, which could help with you if you are playing Shivala the Tiger in a kind of like a control-based Paladin deck, so you gotta keep that in mind. It also benefits with the Loa, or with the Spirit of the Tiger. It's a card we're going to get to shortly. But overall, I'd say this card is just a good card. I think you can test it in a control Paladin deck, and it will just be fine. It's not amazing. I don't think it's going to break a meta. It's just fine. Before we get to that, though, we're going to talk about actually the Shaman Legendary Troll Warrior they revealed, which is Zentimo. Zentimo is a 3-mana 1/3 that has the ability It's a 1-3, so the stats are not decent, so what are you getting? Well, it has an ability that whenever you target a minion with a spell, it also targets adjacent ones. So if there's 3 minions on the battlefield, and you target it with a specific spell, then it's going to target the other 2 minions as well if you target the middle minion. This card is amazing. This card, the amount of target spells that Shaman have at the moment is at an all-time high. Especially a lot of them from the classic set when you think about it. There's also some from other expansions that are still relatively really powerful to get quote-unquote copies of targeting adjacent minions. But it could also just be used to both defensively for removal-based spells, which we have a couple, like lightning, like we have lightning bolt, or I always forget what's the shaman equivalent of it is, or lightning strike or something like that. Then there's like the 1/4 mana spell where you deal free damage and you heal yourself 4 health or something like that. And then you can just use this on buffs, like you can use this with Rockbiter weapon, and maybe you have a board state that's good for a aggressive stance, and then you just attach like Rockbiter weapon to Sentimo, which then gives your adjacent minions Rockbiter weapon. You kind of see how this card can get a teeny bit of syrup. Oh, and not mentioning that we also have a target spell to give a creature Wind Fury. Yeah. The stats are definitely the con of this card, but I do think that effect is very, very powerful. Not to mention its absurd synergy with the Electric Storm Surge. Yeah, this card's amazing. It's going to probably see play. Don't underestimate this card. This card is silly. It's really, really silly. Next up, from an amazing card to a card that is, alright. It's Waterboy. It's a 2-mana 2/1 with the battle cry. Your next hero power this turn costs 0. So, I give this the stats of good. It's just that the stats for a 2-drop are decent. Like, a 2-mana 2/1, there are better stats for a 2-drop. But let's be frank, you're not doing this for the well, you are kind of doing this for the stats in a sense. You're doing this to get a body presence on the floor, while as well getting a free hero power trigger. Which, in some classes, could actually be potentially powerful. Like, in Priest with the Death Knight, you could get additional, since the Death Knight Priests have the ability to refresh their hero power every time they play the card. Well, you kind of get the picture now. You peen, then play Waterboy, which then makes it free. Boop, to play Waterboy again. Boop, you kind of get that. It's also powerful in, like, Death Knight Mage, so the factor that you could play this and then peen it to get a free Ice Elemental, in a sense, so that's something to consider. And it's also interesting to toy with in other classes, just to see if they would like a 2/1 that allows them to get a free hero power out of it. I don't think it's going to be a meta-defining card. I think it's a card that people will test at the very least, especially Mage, since, well, we'll get to it, but Mage has a lot of ways that it's going to manipulate their hero power within this expansion. Nevertheless, though, this card's just good. So, let's get to the payoff for Mage, which is the legendary lower, which is, okay, forgive me, I'm going to butcher this name, but I will try my best. Gen Alai, the Dragonhawk. It's a 7-mana 4/4, so the stats are not great, but what are you getting out of it? Well, Battlecry. If your hero power dealt 8 damage this game, summon Ragnaros the Fire Ward. Now, for people who had just got into Hearthstone or are new to Hearthstone, Ragnaros the Fire Ward is an 8-mana 8/8 that can't attack, but at the end of the turn, it deals 8 damage to a random enemy unit or enemy opponent. Yeah, for people who are new to this game, I'll just put it like this. Ragnaros was a card that was currently in the classic set, until it got moved to the Hall of Fame, which for people who don't know, the Hall of Fame are cards that were banned from the classic set because they were deemed too powerful. Yeah, and we're getting this for technically 7 mana. Oh, and it's also an elemental, which is going to synergize with Death Knight Jaina. Yeah, this card's absurd. It's probably going to see play. Now, the catch is the requirements that you have to do to go get the Ragnaros is tricky. No denying that. Like, the factor that you do have to use your hero power and in theory use it 8 times to deal 8 damage. But as we're going to see, Mage is actually going to have kind of like a mechanic where they're going to manipulate how much damage they can deal with their hero power through various methods. So there is a way to actually get off with this pretty quick. Plus, also a side note, this is a beast, which in Hunter you can actually discover random beasts with the Druid McCall. You could actually get this, and then since your hero power will most likely deal 8 damage during the game, you could actually play this in your deck. You can actually, in Hunter, actually get this as a random card from the Druid McCall, and then play this and then get Ragnaros in Hunter. Yeah. I mean, I guess. Actually, that is interesting to consider. I think there's some classes where this definitely won't synergize that can get this off. Like in Paladin, they probably won't be able to work with this since I don't think it works since you summon a unit which doesn't. It's not a damage based spell, so. Huh. This is an interesting card. It's very powerful. I think I'm going to give it the rating amazing. It's just a really, really good card. And. Oh boy. The power of Ragnaros is nothing to joke about, guys. It's a really silly card. So next up, what am I talking about when I mean that there are ways that Mage are going to have ways to manipulate their hero power? Well, we have one in the Spirit, which in this case is the 2-mana Spirit of the Dragonhawk, a 2-mana 0-free that has a stealth for 1 turn, as we know with Spirits, but it has the ability to make your hero power also target adjacent minions. So, this is actually pretty cool, because what it does is, it essentially, with your main hero power being able to deal 1 damage to a creature, it kind of makes it into a semi-board wipe or semi-damage-based spell, so you spend 2 mana, deal 1 damage, and then deal 1 damage to the adjacent opponents, or opponents' creatures, more specifically. And I really like this card because the factor is it does kind of help, in my personal opinion, it helps against Paladin decks, because now you don't feel bad about pinning only one of the Paladin tokens. You can actually pin both of the Paladin tokens thanks to Spirit of the Dragonhawk. And that feels really good. Yeah, this is a card that is secretly a nice, fun tech card against the Wrath of Baku Paladin. But it's also just nice in general because there's just little multiple synergies. Like, for example, let's say you could use this as to kill multiple creatures with the adjacent minions. Let's say you're Death Knight Jaina, then you kill those multiple minions, and then those triggers will go off so you get multiple ice elementals. And just little stuff like that. Yeah, I would say this card is good. It's not like an absolute bomb of a card, but I do think this is a card that will be tested, and it does have enough synergies that I think people will. I'm almost tempted to give this amazing, but still, it is kind of the old. It's prone to board wipes, and the time when you have to play this can be a little awkward. So, still, I do think it's a really good card. Next up is the Daring Fire Eater, a 1-mana 1/1 with the battle cry. Your next hero power this turn deals 2 more damage. So, in general, this is a free mana battlecry, summon a 1/1, and deal free damage to a target opponent, creature, or opponent itself. This is a really, really good common. Now, it's obvious to say you don't want to play this on turn 1, but having the ability to make your hero power deal more damage can actually help you make your hero power into a pretty decent removal spell in the mid-range creature matchup. It also synergizes with other cards like Clockwork Automaton I can think of from the Witchwood, which doubles the damage you deal with your hero power. So let's do the math here. So you play this, and then you have Clockwork Automaton on the battlefield, and then you deal 6 damage to anything. So in a roundabout way, you can have a 2-mana fireball. Oh, not to mention you could double Clockwork Automatons. Oh, and then double your Daring Fire Eaters, and okay, let's do the math on that one. So, next hero power this turn deals 2 more damage. So then it'll be free, then it'll be 5. So then it will double with 10, and then it will double again, so you can deal 20 damage with your hero power. Okay, now that one is kind of the magical Christmas land scenario, but the fact that that is a possibility does kind of make this card a little bit absurd. I think it's a great common to help this alter your hero archetype, and also, not to mention, this could also be played in odd mage, so your hero pals can now deal 4 damage. So yeah, for free mana, that's really good. This card is nuts. I think it's safe to say this card is amazing. This card will see play. I would be dumbfounded if it didn't. Next up, those were the cards that got revealed from the stream, so now we're going to go from the cards that got revealed on the first day of streamers kind of revealing their cards and such. And the first one they revealed is a rogue spell called Raiding Party. It's a free mana spell. Draw 2 pirates from your deck. Combo, draw a weapon. This is actually just a really good card. So, in the right decks, this is free mana, draw 2 cards, which is decent in itself. But the combo can help you draw a weapon, which maybe you're trying to draw a specific weapon from your deck. And then also drawing the pirates are nice as well. This is the card that I think can complement Kingsbane Rogue style decks really, really well. There's a lot of pirates that rogues have that buff up their weapons. And the factor that they can draw those, as well as use this to, say, draw their Kingsbane as well for free mana, that's pretty good. So in Kingsbane Rogue, I think this is actually a pretty good upgrade, and I'm almost tempted to say this is amazing. Though the problem is the pirate stuff. I don't know if Pirate Tribal will be a thing. I think Kingsbane Rogue is going to be the only place where this card will see play, and I don't think it's an absolute amazing upgrade. I still think it's a good upgrade card to the deck, but I don't think it's going to up the tier level of the deck or anything. But I do think the power of this card is absurd. It's an arcane intellect that can draw you an extra card if you combo with it, and if you have the right weapons in your deck, you don't mind drawing a weapon. Yeah, this card's good. It will see play. Next up is the Grave Horror, a 12 mana 7/8 with taunt that costs 1 less for each spell you cast this game. So for many people, they are realizing that this is the Arcane Giant, but with 1 less attack and it has taunt. I think this is a card that I might be wrong about personally. I know the card will... I don't think it's great. Now, I know the card will probably be very popular when it launches because the current meta with the amount of spare generation that Priest has, which is a lot. No, it's a lot, especially with Shadow Word of Visions and all that stuff. And they have the ability to cube this at very cheap, so the power level is there. However, I do think there are potentially better targets for Priest to cube if they're running that sub-archetype personally than this, which is a 7/8, which with taunt. I mean, in a meta where there's cards like the very big taunt that has lifelink, and then when it dies, it destroys a random enemy minion. You kind of seeing my point here? Now, on the other hand, those are some really good stats for a taunt minion, so it might help in defensive priest decks and such. So it's nothing to put in the back of your head. Plus, also, if you can make this 0, maybe you play the Death Knight, and then you could just use this as both a way to get a defensive unit out and to get a cheap trigger of your hero power. So that's something to consider. Still, I don't really think it's that good. I think it's not that great, but I could see some archetypes where people will toy with the deck. Well, not toy with the deck, toy with the card. That was a brain fart there. Next up, well, we got to that epic where we're going to talk about the Guribashi chicken again. Oh boy. It's a free mana free 4, Wild Beast King. Whenever you draw a beast, give it +2/+2. Yes, the Guribashi chicken is a beast, and yes, you could use this card and maybe have, say, 2 Wild Beast Kings out. And then when you draw the Guribashi chicken, it gets +4/+4 stats, which is actually decent. I do think the card's good, as even though we're going to take the meme Guribachi chicken joke out of the way, I think it's just going to be, the stats are good. A free mana free 4 is really good stats. I think it's just fun to experiment in decks with high beast counts, such as Mid-Range Hunter, even Beast Druid can test this out. And obviously, if the archetype can draw multiple cards in a turn, then this synergizes pretty well, since I think this is a card that's going to get removed or silenced pretty quick, so you would want to put it in a deck archetype where you can get the most synergy out of it right when you play it. Now, it's not a beast itself, which kind of makes it kind of weird in Hunter. I still think it's a good card to test in Hunter, but the thing is, there are cards that it doesn't synergize with, like you can't. It's weird. It's one of those cards where, how do I phrase this? Usually, you want to be very careful to not put non-beast cards if you're playing a mid-range beast hunter, but this might be the exception to the rule, especially with that stat bust. Now, okay, let's talk about the meme deck that I want to talk about with this. And it includes the Guribachi Chicken and the Angry Chicken. One of the decks I might try is actually putting both in a Quest Hunter deck, Wild Beast King, Guribachi Chicken, Angry Chicken, Dire Frenzy, Augmented Elic, and just ways to help keep control and draw into stuff so you can draw a bunch of raptors and then draw a bunch of really, really big chickens. I'll probably call it like the Lynx Cuckoo Disaster deck or some shtick like that, but do I still think this deck would be a good competitive deck? Oh no, this is a meme deck, no sweat about it. But that doesn't make this card bad. I think Wild Beast King is actually a good card. I think you can actually toy with it in mid-range beast decks and actually get some good fun with it. Plus, it also synergizes well with Kelisef style decks as well. Next up, it's the Spirit of the Tiger. A 4-mana 0-free, stealth for 1 turn, as we mentioned before. But this one has the ability that whenever you cast a spell, so remember that 7-mana spell that we were considering? The new Challenger one? Okay, let's remember that. Summon a tiger with stats equal to its cost. So that new Challenger spell, when you cast that, not only do you get a 6-mana minion with Taunt and Divine Shield, you also, if you have this on the field, get a 7-mana 7/7 tiger. I think this card is really good. This obviously wants to be in a spell-centric paladin deck, but this or two of them out and generating creatures with either cheap or middle-cost spells can be potentially very powerful. But still, the con is they are just stats alone. There's not any special thing about them. They don't have, like, stealth, they don't have rush or anything. These are just plain vanilla stat minions. And they are still prone to board wipes, as well as this card as well. But I think this is going to be a fun card to test in Buff Paladin, and I think it might see play in Control Paladin, because the ability to get extra use out of your control spells to generate stuff is something to consider. Though the one con is in like Control Paladin, there is the factor that I can think right at the bat that you obviously don't want to play this with the classic Equality while a Pyromancer combo. Yeah, you don't want to do that. But with more control-based spells like Consecration or Lay on Hands, or even now with a new Challenger approaches, it's something to consider. Overall, I do think the cards are good. I think you can test this in like a very spell-centric or control paladin-based deck and still have some decent results with the card. Next up, we get actually the legendary Loa for rogues, and this one is a weird card. It's Grawl the Shark. It's a 5-mana 2/2. Just hold your horses. I know that sounds bad in stats, but let's read the rest of the card. It has a battle cry, eat a minion in your deck, and it gains its stats. So it takes a card from your deck, and it looks at the stats of that card, and essentially destroys the card, and then it gains its stats. But it has a death rattle to add it to your hand, specifically the card that Grawl destroys. This card, I had to think about it for a little bit, because this card is weird. This is a weird card to play, but overall, I do think the potential synergy in Death Rattle Rogue is something to consider. And you do kind of want to try this in a deck with high toughness or high power creatures. Like, some people are considering the Mimia scenario with Grawl the Shark, and then you have the Darkness in your deck. Maybe you have a very spell-centric rogue deck. Whether that's possible or not, I don't think so, but then it's like, oh, you can get the Darkness, and then this is like a 5-mana 22, which, yeah, it's powerful. Don't get me wrong. A 5-mana 22/22 is really powerful. but it's still prone to silence. And I feel like for this card to be decent in decks, you have to at least make this a 5/5 or 6/6. Any bigger, it gets amazing, but still, the factor is, I think this synergizes well in Death Rattle Rogue because you can use this, especially with Necroleum spells such as Necroleum Blade and Necroleum Poison, to actually get additional triggers, and maybe you can draw very specific cards. It's a weird kind of semi, you might be able to use this as a tutor spell in a weird sense. Still, I think the card is good. I think you can still put this in Death Rattle Rogue to test it out. But this card is... I feel like this is a card that people will meme with, but I don't think people will have very competitive decks with it. So if there is ever any way to be consistent and make this a 5-mana 22/22, then I think this card is going to be a little bit obnoxious. Do I think that consistency will happen? Probably not. Okay, next up we actually get to a really cool, another neutral legendary that got revealed, which is Hakar the Soulflayer, which is a 10-mana 9/6 that has a Death Rattle to shuffle a Corrupted Blood into each player's deck. And what a Corrupted Blood is a 1-mana spell that has cast when drawn. For people who don't know what that effect is, it's when you draw the card, it will cast a spell automatically, and then it will draw you an additional card to replace the card that they cast with it. And what Corrupted Blood does is cast when drawn, and then you take free damage, and then after you draw the card that you would draw from the casting of this, you then will shuffle 2 copies of Corrupted Blood into your deck. So, and should I mention with the Death Rattle, both of you are getting copies of Corrupted Blood in your deck. Now, the flavor on this card is really, really cool. I'll say that right off the bat. For those of you who do not know the history of Hakar, this is actually based off an old raid boss that happened where essentially they had this curse called the Corrupted Blood if you go into the raid. And what some people figured out, there was kind of a glitch that made it where you can keep the Corrupted Blood, which it was one that can actually... It's kind of like a disease where it can contact other players as well that you're around with when you play in the game and such. Your NPCs can contact this and such. And people found out that you could accidentally get out of the zone while still have the Corrupted Blood, and it caused like a epidemic in the game that required a set reserver reset. And oh my, it was silly. Like, there's still Centers of Disease researched that whole scenario, and it was a very historic event in that game. And to have a card that is very memorial to that, especially the fact that both of you are going to be dealt damage with the Corrupted Blood, is really cool. Now, is it a good card? I think this is an interesting card to test in late game control decks. And Warlock Control might actually take advantage of this. I think will take advantage of this most because what they can do is they can use the one legendary from Convulsive Catacombs to essentially destroy the opponent's deck if they can go off with, being dirtily enough to get Azari and then use Azari to destroy the opponent's deck, and then they play Hakar, find a way to destroy it, and then Corrupted Blood's in their deck is the only thing that's in their deck, and obviously they are going to be dealt a lot of damage, and they are in a losing streak. Your opponent will die if that combo happens. But there's also some silly other combos. Like in Paladin, you could play this in Paladin control, and then if you have, let's say you let Corrupted Blood go off at least a few times, and then you can play Prince Liam, which then takes all your copies of Corrupted Blood in your deck and transform them into legendary minions, since they take 1-cost spells and transform them into legendary minions, which is really cool. Now, if there is one con to making this card potentially powerful in this current meta, is Skulking Geist. Skulking Geist is a 6-mana creature that came from the Frozen Phone that has a battle cry: destroy all 1-cost spells let me rephrase this. Destroy all 1-cost cards in players' hands and decks. So obviously you play this, you try to go around about this, and then try to get people to have Corrupted Blood, and then somebody plays Skulking Geist and destroys it, which will feel kind of bad. And the thing is, Skulking Geist is currently a very popular meta card, especially since it helps counter against decks that like to use 1-mana spells, such as Taunt Druid and Zoo Warlock and such. So, I think in this current rotation, I'm not sure if the card will see much play, but I do think the power level is there, and overall, I think it's an amazing card. It's a card that post-rotation, it's going to be really a potentially very scary threat, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Sandalia Templar. I think is how you pronounce that. It's a 4-mana 4/4 with Battlecry. If you restore 10 health this game, it gains +4/+4 and taunt. I think this card's just good. It gives a very good incentive for control and heal paladin style decks. And one note that people need to remember with this condition, it doesn't just mean health that's restored to you, it can also mean health that you restore to your minions. Which, that is very synergistic since we have a lot of ways to heal minions in the game. Like, Zoo Warlock is the one that you can probably remember how they constantly heal their minions to try to buff up that one drop that gets a attack boost. And that's just other stuff like that. So, that's something you need to consider. So there are ways to restore health to your minions that are not just spells, which can make this go off a lot more quicker than people think of when at first glance. Now, it is a card that is still prone to silence, so you gotta keep that in mind. But still, the stats are decent. I don't think this is like an absolute meta-defining card or anything. I think this is a good card you can just test and control Paladin just to give it a shot. So overall, I think it's just a good card. Next up is Shriek. It's a 1-mana Warlock spell, which has discard your lowest cost card, but you deal 2 damage to all minions. I think this is a really great early game board control spell for Warlocks, and the selective discarding is very powerful in the right deck archetypes, especially if discard Warlock can be a fiend, and we are getting a lot of cards to actually support the discard Warlock archetype. Just wait and see. And I think it's just a nice and balanced card. It might even help set up some really tricky defiles also. And Control Warlock may try this card since the card that they discard might not matter as much as people would think. Obviously, this won't see play in Zoo Warlock for, well, obvious reasons. But still, I think this is a really good card for Warlock. I think it will see play in the decks. And it will definitely see play in Discard Warlock because, yeah, we're going to get to it. I think I'll just get to the payoff right off the bat. So it's High Priestess Jeklik, the Warlock Legendary Warrior. It's a 4-mana 3/4 with Taunt and Lifesteal. So overall, those stats are just decent in themselves. Oh, and it has the ability that whenever you discard this, you add 2 copies of it to your hand. Okay, how do I put this? I think it's safe to say first, the card's amazing. The stats in themselves are just decent by themselves. But let's just do a magical Christmas land scenario, shall we? Let's say you're able to trigger this off 2 times just through random discard spells that you are playing in your deck and such. So you get 2 additional copies. So you have like 4 copies of High Priestess Jeklik in your hand, and you decide not to play them because maybe you're controlling the battlefield and you don't need a player down just yet. Let's say the opponent then plays a very intimidating board state. And you decide to play Cataclysm, which is a 4-mana spell that discards your entire hand, destroy all creatures, which would be bad, except you have 4 copies of High Priestess Jeklik in your hand, and oh, those copies now become 8 copies of High Priestess Jeklik in your hand. And that's just the Magical Christmas Land scenario. Overall, and just in Discard Warlock, I think this is just going to be a very decent minion just to get additional copies of, and just those stats in general are just decent. I mean, this is one of the payoff cards, besides the quest, besides the bug legendary that I always forget the name of. This is probably the final payoff that make Discard Warlock a thing. Because it is really, really good in Discard Warlock. I think this card will up the power level of that deck significantly. I think the card's amazing. And even without the discard fiend in general, this is just a decently stat minion. For those stats, that's something you will play. So yeah, it's amazing. Next up is another discard manas type of deck card, which is the Reckless Dire Troll, a free mana 2/6 that has taunt and the battle cry discard your lowest cost card. Honestly, there's not much to talk about. This card's just good. It's a card that's a free mana 2/6, which is good early game. It's alright, and you can use it for selective discarding. The only cons, I think early game discard could be risky, because you might actually discard some essential stuff you might not want to discard, like you may accidentally discard your board wipe, like the Shriek, so you have to be careful with that. But still, it's a decent card. I can see Discard Warlock trying this out. I think it's a good card overall. Next up is a really weird payoff card in Discard Warlock, which is a 6 mana 6/6 Soul Warden, and has a battle cry to add free random minions you discarded this game to your hand. Honestly, I would say this card is potentially good. I mean, a 6 mana 6/6 is decent stats. It's not great stats, but it's decent. And drawing free early game cards, or maybe even late game cards that you accidentally discarded, could be potentially very good. Plus, if you accidentally discarded this and you could put 2 copies of this in your deck, you can kind of have a recursion engine of sort and potentially draw a Soul Warden from Soul Warden and then play Soul Warden to draw an additional Soul Warden. You kind of get the shtick. I think this is a card that I want to test in the meta to see the overall value of that. Still, this is obviously only playable in Discard Warlock for, well, obvious reasons. Still, I think the card is good, though it is going to be one that could potentially not be that great if it turns out drawing the free additional cards we discarded is not as powerful as we once perceived. Okay, next up, we're going to go to the Smolderthorn Lancers, which is a free mana free 2 dragon, or not, well, brain fart. It's a free mana free 2 warrior minion, and the reason why I said dragon is because if you're holding a dragon, destroy a damaged enemy minion. So, a free 2 is actually really good stats for a free mana minion. And also, the factor that spell that's attached to it is actually really powerful to put on a minion. Because, as people know, it's hard to execute minions that have the what is hexproof in Hearthstone, which is like cannot be targeted by spells. I always forget the name of what's the Hearthstone equivalent of hexproof. But creatures do bypass that. And the fact that we have a creature variation of execute is very powerful. Now, the question is whether or not if Dragon Warrior can be a thing. We have seen some cards to definitely encourage the archetype. We'll get to those. But overall, I think it'll be interesting to see if Dragon Warrior is a thing, because this is a really good, like, minion to put in a dragon-oriented warrior deck, because don't underestimate unconditional removal, semi-unconditional removal, since the minion does have to be damaged, but still, it's a good card. It's a really, really good card. Next up, another Dragon Matters card, which actually is a neutral minion that can go into anybody's deck. And that is the 2 mana 2/2 Fire Tree Witch Doctor, which has the battle cry, if you're holding a dragon, discover a spell. Yeah, this card's amazing. Okay, yeah, 2 mana 2/2, not great stats, don't get me wrong. But, and this is the biggest but, this card is absurd in a couple of archetypes. The one I can think of right off the bat is Spiteful Priest can actually try this card out with relative success because, well, they mostly are playing the control-based dragon package, such as the Dustbreakers and Primordial Drakes, etc., etc., etc. So, if they have those in hand and they play this, they can actually discover a spell that can actually help them control the battlefield, which then helps them out because then they don't have to put a spell in their deck besides the 10 mana spell for the Spiteful. I always forget the name of the card, like Spiteful something's blah 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 blah. I always forget the name of the last name, but the Kobolds and Catacombs card, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's just also nice to encourage dragon archetypes and multiple classes in general because being able to discover a spell can be potentially very powerful. Now, there are some times where you maybe will get an option of a spell that you don't want, but still, the factor that it is if you hold a dragon, draw a card, it's actually pretty good. Now the question is, will we have enough dragons for this archetype? I think the answer is yes. There are already archetypes that will play dragons, and they do play dragons. And I do think Dragon Warrior is becoming a lot more potential, especially with the Nets card. But overall, this card's amazing. It will see play. And the last card we got for tonight, that's technically one that was going to be reviewed within like the next hour or two as of recording this, but for the sake of editing to get this out as quick, I decided to just get this out real quick. But the last card we're going to talk about is the Warmaster Voon, the Warrior Legendary Troll. Legendary Troll Warrior, which is a 4-mana 4/3 that has a battle cry to copy all dragons in your hand. Yet again, another amazing card. The stats are decent. A 4-mana 4/3 is not bad stats. Like, it's not amazing, but it's decent. But generating extra dragons can help with the Dragon Warrior be a potentially powerful archetype. This actually might make Control Warriors with dragons as either a sub or main archetype be a potential thing. And there are powerful late game dragons that you will want to duplicate. Like, you will want to probably duplicate Ysera's. You probably want to duplicate Primordial Drakes. You probably even don't mind duplicating Sleepy Dragons. And also the fact that there are ways to bring this minion, since for it being such a cheap minion, bring this back to your hand using fiends like Brewmaster is the one you can think of right off the bat, or even cards like, I always forget the name of this one, but Zola, I think it is, to get a golden copy of this, and then you duplicate it, and you get more dragons. And then, since this card was previewed in Wanshi, there is a potential payoff of having multiple dragons in your hand, and then using Boommaster's Boom Ship to get free of those dragons, hopefully, out onto the battlefield with Rush to hopefully get a major board tempo presence. So, yeah, this card is amazing. Now, yes, this is a card that's going to be very dependent whether or not if Dragon Warrior is a thing, but I think it's a potential thing because this is a really, really good payoff card. It's a good generating of resources. Yeah, it's safe to say this card is amazing. And overall, that's all the cards I'm going to talk about so far. I'm going to catch up with a video for the next video on the other cards they revealed. And we're going to try to make multiple parts video, depending on multiple days, or maybe even 2 days and such, just so that I can catch up with all these cards, and hopefully get ready for the final reveal stream that's happening on Monday. So, overall, I hope you enjoyed my 2 cents on the cards. I hope you all have a lovely day. This is LevDev, signing out.